off.
Good afternoon, everyone. This presentation, I suspect, is much needed. So as you read through the multitude of information that's in front of you, the LTP, this can seem quite confusing, I know. So we are now going to demystify everything about waste and the options in front of you. And the team have worked really, really hard, and this is the culmination of probably about 2 years' worth of work. And hopefully all will become clear at the end of Chris's presentation. And welcome Jenny as well.
Thank you. You're right, this is quite a complicated topic that we've been working through, so I do appreciate that Council has had a lot in their mind, and this is just adding to another layer of complexity. However, what we are proposing is essentially the biggest level of service change in the waste space that's come in since we've introduced recycling, so it is something of importance. So the intent today is Jenny and I will run through these slides in probably about 20 minutes or so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So if you've got a question in your mind, we've probably got a slide on it.
You can put your hand up and I'll put you on the list, and I've already got Councillor Free and Councillor Chung on the list.
Certainly. So about a year and a half ago, the Council created its first zero waste strategy, and it was adopted, and what's in front of you at the moment, these are the 5 key targets that we are working towards, and you can see that that removing organics actually features on 4 of the top 5 targets there. So removing organics is super important for us to actually deliver the change that the strategy has advised us to do so. Next slide. So when we think about all the challenges we have in the waste space, if you were to focus on one problem, it would be removing organics. So removing organics is the single most important thing that from a waste point of view that we can actually focus on. And from a problem point of view, each year we have around 17,000 tonnes of organics material that ends up being buried in the landfill. This doesn't count what we currently divert, and it doesn't count all of the other material that we collect that goes to another landfill. Because what happens is the Spicer landfill covers all the material that's picked up from the northern areas, so Tara, Johnsonville, some of Kandala ends up in Spicer landfill. And obviously putting organics into Spicer landfill helps to make their odour problem a fair bit worse. So from a comparison point of view, I've just put up there because no one really knows what a tonne is. So if you think about it, 17,000 tonnes is 3,400 elephants or 13,000 Toyota Corollas. So it's a lot. Okay, next slide, please. As you know, we've consulted on two recommended options. And I'll just briefly go over what we're talking about. So C, we're talking about recycling a 240 litre and a 45 litre. So a 45 litre crate, which is what we currently have, and the 240 litre is increased from the current recycling vessel that we have. From the more topical area of discussion would be the introduction of organics. So we're proposing an 80 litre organics collection comes in. That'll be weekly, and that'll be supplemented with 120 litre rubbish, which is 60 litres per week. So they're the changes that we are proposing. Spent a lot of time over the past month responded to LTP questions and feedback and thoughts both from councillors and the public and everyone, it seems. Everyone's very interested in this, including my neighbours. So there's a few key topics I just want to touch on, and then there are some slides that further support this. The big one is cost. So we've been told that this is going to cost more. In reality, this is actually going to be, for most Wellingtonians, this will result in less cost in their household. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this relates to the fragmented system that we have with 66% of Wellingtonians actually using a private system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that further on. Volume. We've heard that we're increasing the bin size volume by rolling out the 120 litre rubbish bins. Well, in actual fact, due to the way that the private market works and coupled with the average usage that people use for bags, we're actually decreasing the bin capacity by 61%. So we're able to do that because we are proposing to introduce organics and a larger recycling. Clutter, we've been told, and we've met with the accessibility group and a few other local parties. The reality is at the moment, we have service trucks turning up 10 out of 14 days. There's 3 private sector companies that operate in Wellington, plus we've got a council service for glass, we've got a council service for rubbish bags, and a council service for recycling. So on any given day, generally there's 10 days in every fortnight that trucks turn up, which obviously creates more trucks, more pollution, and more clutter on our streets. By moving to essentially coordinated model, what we're actually doing is we're not having 3 per day. We can actually coordinate this to the point where we're talking 3 to 4 trips per day. So trips per fortnight. So we reduce it from 10 visits on your street to 3 to 4. So it's actually it's far more efficient.
And I'll just add, one of the things we did hear from the Accessibility Advisory Group is that that is a key issue for them, like the number of days that there is obstructions on the footpath is quite important. So if we can reduce from having a bin on the footpath pretty much every weekday to having a bin on the footpath maybe 3 out of 10 weekdays in a fortnight, or 4 out of 10 weekdays in a fortnight, that could make a significant difference for people.
Yep. We'll get onto this topic a little bit further, but bin sizes for high and low waste households. Now, this is something that we'll need to work through. The strong advice that we've been given, if you are considering a deployment of this nature, it is always best to start with a standard approach, a standard service, in this case a standard bin, and then reassess after a certain amount of time once it's gone live, because people tend to underestimate or overestimate the actual usage. So this is something that we'll need to work through, but we are recommending to begin with a standard approach and then assess and provide options back to councillors to determine whether or not it does make sense to offer smaller bins or larger bins. Timing, the go live is 27/28. This is not something that's going to happen next week. There's an enormous amount of work that would be required to work through the development of an organics processing facility, and then to work through what the implementation, make sure that you get the new service provider on board. So there's a lot of moving parts we need to work through. The other big focus area is composting. Now, a lot of people have suggested, or a few people have suggested, but they seem to keep suggesting the same thing over and over again, that composting is the solution for home, and that it is the solution for the community. And whilst we see great value in composting, the reality is that composting alone is not enough to reduce that 17,000 tonnes that ends up at our tip each year. Now, it can certainly be part of the system, but if you look across New Zealand, you look across the world, there's a reason why we focus so strongly, and why councils and cities are focused so strongly on a curbside service, is because composting may be fine for some people, but it's not suitable for all types of households, for all types of people's lifestyles. And what we've found, and we found this in the trial that we did about a year and a half ago, is that we recover the most from a curbside service. And even when we offered, just to go on a little bit of tangent here, no, I won't. I can see Siobhan looking at me. I'm not going to go on my tangent, but I'll come back to it later. Okay, that's it. Okay, I'm going to keep rushing through. So since we did the September business case, there's a few changes. We've obviously gone out and completed our T&T independent report. We finished some more cost-benefit analysis. We've got more information from the market. So we've got a few updates for you. So what we propose is that for the first part of the deployment, we exclude CBD, multi-unit dwellings and private streets that don't currently receive a service. So they'll be excluded from the service and obviously excluded from the targeted rate. And this is on the basis of the change that we are proposing is significant. It's going to be difficult enough to make this change with the standard suburban. So we need to do more work to understand what is the type of bespoke requirements for multi-unit dwellings, because we have space challenges there, we have noise challenges there, we have so many challenges there that if we were to decide to include it as part of a standard deployment, it was most likely going to cause us significant problems. So the best thing to do is to work on a standard approach, and then from there spend the next year or so working through what would a multi-unit dwelling, private road and CBD option require. That's the first point. Second point is, of those people remaining, 70% can receive a bin service. But 30% of the people, due to health and safety and Wellington's unique streetscape and other reasons, will have to receive the same service, but they will receive it via bags. And this is to do with really steep street, hard to access, health and safety, accessibility. There's a number of reasons why a bin isn't appropriate for certain dwellings in Wellington. Next point, we recommend no interim processing. So we were asked to consider whether or not we could start a service potentially early and have some interim processing. We've engaged the market. We have had some response back. However, based on the cost and the logistics, what has been proposed, it's not a complete solution. It's largely a partial solution. For that reason, we wouldn't recommend going a year early, just to be better to make the change at once. The cost-benefit analysis has been updated. I won't go into too much details here because we've got a couple of slides on it, but the recommended option has a net benefit of $77 to $264 million over 30 years, and Jenny can talk through that. And we've had a minor update on the forecasted targeted rate from $14 to $18, which is an increase of around 5%. Okay, got to speed up here a little bit. This is a really interesting slide for me, and this is a slide that shows how Wellington City actually works. So at the moment, 66% of rubbish services is delivered by the private sector, and this is predominantly split over three different private sector service providers. Now, what this means is 66% are using a private service, and then of those that use the private service, the vast majority, as you can see, are actually using a 240 litre bin, around 70%. And then about 20% are using 120, and then 85% are using a small one. Now, when you combine that with the council bags, on average, each person uses 1.3 bags per week. You put those all together, and what that provides you with is each week we are collecting, or the Wellington City market is collecting, around 538,000 tonnes. That is, each year. That is the capacity. And what we're proposing to do is move to a 60 litres. So we are significantly reducing the amount of rubbish, because we are enabling that through adding in larger recycling and organic services. This is yours. Yeah. We're going to move to Jenny now.
Kia ora. So we're still recommending options F and C, which were the recommended options in the consultation document. As Chris said, there's the updated net benefits for each of the 4 packages that we evaluated in the cost-benefit analysis. Option F is not the best performing option in the cost-benefit analysis, but there are significant benefits that we could not fully include in the cost-benefit analysis because they cannot be quantified and measured. And it's for those reasons that we are still recommending food and garden waste in a glass crate as the way forward. This will deliver the highest diversion, and that means that all of the intangible environmental and cultural benefits that come with that will be greater under this option. So one example of an intangible environmental benefit is the lowering our contribution to the soil and water pollution. We don't have a way to measure that in the cost-benefit analysis and include it. This option, the glass crate options, both deliver the best resource circularity, because if we collect the glass in a glass bin, we can't colour sort it. If we collect it in a crate, when they pick it up at the curb, they colour sort the glass. If you don't colour sort the glass, you can't turn it back into glass bottles or glass containers. The only thing you can do is grind it up into sand, basically, and use it in roading aggregate. It's a very low value product, and it's not circular. You can't turn it into glass again and again. You grind it into sand, and it's used once, and that's it. So another intangible benefit that goes along with that is the reduction of having to take sand out of the environment and turn it into glass in the first place. We can leave more resources in the ground, but again, we have no way to quantify that and include it in the cost-benefit analysis. A significant issue that we think is an operational concern in Wellington is that a 23-litre bin could be significantly affected by wind. One of the reasons we brought the bins is so you can kind of have a feel of them today and get a sense of what they're like. But we certainly had this experience when we did the Miramar trial of food scraps, that empty food scraps bins were blowing around quite a lot. And we've heard anecdotally, even in Auckland, where they've just rolled out that 23-litre bin size, complaints from people about their bins blowing around and going missing. If it's a problem in Auckland, it's going to be even more of a problem here. So that's really a very practical consideration in terms of the environment that we are in Wellington, that the 80-litre bin is just bigger, it's more solid, it might blow over, but it's not going to blow away. But we have no way of monetizing and quantifying that benefit in the cost-benefit analysis. The other thing I just wanted to say is that a glass crate is, we think, the most adaptable if a container return scheme comes in future. If that happened, we would expect to see a decrease in the amount of glass being recycled at the curb, and we could then move the glass crate to being collected 3 weekly or 4 weekly if we needed to respond to that. Whereas the glass wheelie bin, it would be harder for us to make those kinds of changes. So that's another concern, and again, we can't really capture that in the cost-benefit analysis. So those are the considerations that have gone into that recommendation. This is the slide you'll be most interested in, Councillor Free, because I think this is the one that's going to answer some of your questions about household affordability and what are the costs going to be for households. So we had people go out and look at what are the prices of these types of private bin services, 240-litre bin, collected weekly, et cetera, and we averaged the prices across the companies. And then we also estimated what's the cost if you're using a bag. So if you're putting out 3 bags a week, so a lot of people who use the bag service are actually like student flats, those kind of larger households, so they might put out 2 or 3 bags a week. The average is 1.3 bags per week, so we've included that. And then we've looked at what about a low waste household that maybe is putting out 1 bag every fortnight and what the costs are for them. And what we can say is that pretty much if you're using a private bin service, the council service will be cheaper. And 66% of Wellingtonians are using a private bin service right now. So we are pretty confident that 66% of Wellingtonians will actually be paying less for this service than they are currently paying for their rubbish service right now. For the 34% of Wellingtonians who are using bags, it becomes more complicated. We can't tell you how many households are putting out more than 1 bag a week or how many households are putting out less than 1 bag a week. But we certainly can say that people who are putting out the average 1.3 bags a week, the cost is going to be a little bit higher or at least close to what they're paying now. It's really those low waste households. If you're putting out less than 1 bag a week, then you might see, you would expect to see an increase in cost. And that's obviously going to be an issue we need to consider for those households. Now, the main lever that you have to try and deliver affordability for those households is what Chris was talking about before, which is offering smaller bin sizes. So other councils offer smaller bin sizes and then they offer a discount on the targeted rate that goes along with that. So for example, Tauranga City Council allow you to choose between different bin bundles, a large, a standard and a small. And the small bin bundle is $35 a year less than the standard bin bundle. So that is really the main way to offer kind of more affordability to those low waste households that we know you've heard from during the consultation and might be concerned about. This one's you.
It is indeed. So, as I've mentioned before, there remains some uncertainty in this process that we've been working through, and I just want to outline where the uncertainty lies. We remain committed to working in partnership with Hutt City Council and Porirua City Council, and we continue to progress with our applications to MFE. So if you recall, there's two applications. The first one is around the bin, or the bin infrastructure as they call it, and the second one is around the organics processing capability. So we've been granted through MFE. We've essentially progressed to the next stage for both of those through the expression of interest, and now we're in the process of lodging our final application with MFE, which should happen in the next few weeks. But there is some risk involved in this. Now, there's obviously there's a risk that one of the other councils will decide to withdraw from the process, and we won't know until after the LTP what the final decisions on that is. But what we do know is that all councils have put allocated budget aside as part of the LTP process. So that's what we do know. Obviously, we do hold a risk that MFE will not fully fund, or even fund any of it, to be frank, this application. However, the fact that we have passed through the first two stages of the application process does give us a lot of hope. MFE were discussing at the Wastemin conference today the fact that they do remain committed to improving the waste system, and we should be expecting more policies to come out. The fact that they have in no way killed this policy says a lot about their support of this policy. However, we have to wait till the end of the year as they work through that legislation throughout Parliament. So they're the big question marks that we are working with. But at this stage, from a council point of view and an MFE point of view, and from a market engagement point of view, so we've completed our RFI. We've had really positive responses back in line with our expectations in terms of the available technologies and the price point. So everything is pointing in the right direction. But I just want to be really clear with councillors that this is the ambiguity that we are working through at the moment. We've got some key dates here. So obviously the first key date is this council and other councils' LTP participation. We'll find that out obviously in July. In December is when we commence the tender evaluation and negotiation process as part of the three councils for the processing organics. And then in early 25 is when MFE will provide us with a decision on the funding. So they're the key gates, and obviously if anything changes, council makes a decision, anything changes or deviates from that, we'll certainly have to come back and update you. I think that's it. Oh, do we want to go through do we need to go through the timeline one?
We'll just quickly do funding sources, because it is really... it is really complicated, the funding sources. There are a number of different activities in this space, and each one's funded differently. So we just wanted to try and give some clarity there. So the key thing is that none of the waste activities are funded out of general rates. The new proposal is that the rubbish and organics collections would be funded out of a targeted rate that would just apply to those households that can receive the service, so that are eligible for the service, and that would start in 27-28. Recycling and glass is currently funded out of landfill fees and is going to be continued to be funded out of landfill fees. The implementation costs for this program will be funded out of some MFE grant funding, the WMA waste levy, and landfill surpluses. So that's all funded from those places. CBD collections are currently funded from rubbish and recycling bag sales, and they will, as they continue to be offered, they will continue to have bag sales paying for them until we replace those services. And then CapEx is funded. There's obviously MFE grant funding there, as well as the landfill surplus fund, and then some new debt for the remainder.
Last slide. I've actually I've just spoken to this slide a couple of minutes ago, so I won't go into this slide again. It provides a high-level time frame. You've been issued this slide via email, so if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them in the Q&A or just get in touch with me.
And I think that just the key thing on this slide is that the decision that you make in terms of changing the level of service means that we are going to be going into a procurement process. So there's not a future decision after that. The decision gets made on Thursday. We wait for the LTP to be finalised, and then procurement process for a new collection contract. and we will continue with the organics processing procurement process. There will be lots more details around implementation plans and how all of this is going to work that we'll need to update you on as that continues. We will need to come back and have a consultation about the targeted rate and specifically how it's structured. Should it be a flat fee for the properties? Should it be based on a capital value? There are different things that can happen in that space. That needs to happen as well. But this is a decision for us to proceed to procurement for collections.
All right, I have some questions. Yeah, I've got you on the list. Councillor Free.
Okay, so I would be very interested to know how you found out the data around the 60-odd% of residents that are currently using private systems.
Sure, this whole area is really difficult to work in terms of data. So my new favourite phrase is actually data suggests, because that's all I can really say to you is that the data suggests these things. I'm not going to say the data shows. It's all very uncertain, and we do have to make a lot of assumptions. The data set that we've worked on to make that assessment is based on two things. We looked at our rubbish bag sales and how many bags we actually sell in a year. And then there's a survey data that was conducted every few years that is called the SWAP data survey, and it's a waste assessment. And their assessment was that the average number of bags put out by a household is 1.3 bags per week. So we can use that 1.3 bags per week, and we can say we know how many total bags we sell in a year. And we use that to estimate how many households we think are using the council bagged service.
How did you manage to separate out what's going on with commercial rubbish bins and residential rubbish bins? Because I imagine quite a lot of the waste is actually coming from industry and commercial sectors.
Well, we were looking simply at the 67,000 odd households that we are evaluating. So we were looking at, of the 67,000 households, how many do we think are using the council bagged service? And our best estimate for that is that we think 34% of those 67,000 households are using the council bagged service, which means the remainder we think have a rubbish service. We don't think they're doing nothing. We think that they're the ones who are using a private bin service.
And then I guess the other thing I want to know is, I understood the targeted rate was going to be a flat rate, but now you're saying there's actually some discretion on that. Can you still describe it as a targeted rate if it's variable on capital value?
Yes, it's targeted because it's targeted to specific properties. But a targeted rate could be set as a flat rate or as a percentage of capital value or in a number of other ways. That said, we would likely recommend it be a flat rate. Every other council in the country who does this service with a targeted rate funding uses a flat rate. So it's unlikely that we would do anything else, but from a legal standpoint, in terms of complying with the Local Government Act, we would need to look at all practicable options, evaluate those, provide a recommendation and take it to consultation. That hasn't happened yet. It would need to happen in future.
I have some other questions, but let somebody else
I'll put you back on the list, yeah. Councillor Chung. Mike, yeah.
My first question is, I was talking to you about this before, Chris. When you're looking at these little bins here, are you looking at the main benefit being in flat areas or all of Wellington? So are you looking at the whole of Wellington as one area? Because I can see those bins blowing from here into the harbour. Really, I mean, I pick up the other open bins that we use for glass, and they just go everywhere. So
to answer your question, yes, we are considering this. We're considering this for all Wellington suburbs.
Mm-hmm. To be clear, Councillor Chung, that's not the bin they're proposing.
It's the bigger bin.
It's an example of
They're
why
showing why we're not.
So that's kind of the first component, is that when we consider this, we consider this for all Wellington suburbs. The second component of the answer is that there is a reason why. I mean, withstanding the wind is one of the reasons why we did prefer the 85 litre bin, because we gets a bit more weight to it, obviously. Mm-hmm. Now, in saying that, we shouldn't think that these two bins here is the solution. So what we're trying to do is get a decision. There could be some innovations to help with the wind problem and other challenges, right? So this is just that's the reason why one of the reasons why we selected the 85.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. How many questions did I get?
You've had one and you can have 2 more.
I had one. Oh, okay. 17,000 elephants here.
Yep.
How did you actually? Oh, sorry, 17,000 tons. I mean.
3,400 elephants.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
How did you actually estimate this amount? Because at the moment, people put their rubbish into the bins and into the bags and together with organics.
Yeah, so again, it's a waste assessment survey that is done, and in this case, it would have been it was a survey done at Southern Landfill, and as the trucks came in from curbside collection during the day, they actually just like rip them open. They rip open the bags, they rip it all open, and they measure everything and they sort it into this could have been recycled or this could have been separated, and they give us data about all of the different things that end up in the landfill. So that's where that number comes from. Again, there's some uncertainty because it's a sample taken in a single week, but it's the best data we have.
Okay, great, thanks. And my second question.
The third question.
Third question. What's the percentage in Wellington between residential houses and people living in the CBD in multi-storey buildings and apartments?
80% of houses are included in this service change that we're recommending now, and a further 10% of households are in the CBD. And the final 10% of households are living in multi-unit developments or on private roads outside of the CBD. So the decision that you make on Thursday will affect 80% of residential households, and we're recommending that we come back to you on that other 20% who are a bit more challenging to make proposals going forward at a future date.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Jenny. So I have a couple of questions. One is I'm concerned that this removes the incentives for composting. So I am what you term a low waste generator, and I have a worm farm, and I've got several stories of worms. Was that
Yep.
phrase? So I'm just concerned that people like me who are composting, why would we bother? As I hate worms, I've said I will stop. If I see them, I'm going to stop doing it.
Yeah, I think if people want to continue to compost, that's the main benefit, is that they can use the compost in their own garden. And if they decided that they didn't want to compost and they wanted to use the council service, then they could do that. I think one of the key things that we have seen from the limited data we have about home composting is that even people who have a compost bin often don't use it that much because it's not as easy potentially. So, that's really that issue around. But if you're a committed composter, I'm sure that you could continue to use your worm farm to create wonderful compost for your garden.
So thank you. So the other thing is, has there been any thought of your targeted rate, instead of looking at capital value, looking at the number of bedrooms in a house?
That's something we could consider as we go forward. There's quite a bit of work to go into how that targeted rate would be calculated.
Okay, and then am I allowed a third one? So the other thing is that for most Wellingtonians it's going to cost less, but I'm concerned that the ones for whom it will cost more are often more vulnerable, residents and me.
Yes, Councillor, absolutely. And that's obviously a concern that's backed up by the submissions and the data that we've seen. As I say, the main lever that you have if you want to go forward with this proposal is offering smaller bin sizes with a discounted targeted rate. That's the key affordability lever that you have under a new system.
Okay, I've got lots of other things, but I'll save them. Thank you.
Councillor Pennant.
Thank you very much. It's been a 6-year journey to get to this point, so I really appreciate all your work. The first question is, would you have any concerns about including a noting that we will consult with inner city residents and that smaller bins will be an option in the future, just to address the concerns from two groups of people who are worried about the scheme?
Sorry, on the first point, we will consult with who? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
So sorry, I've got it cold. With inner city residents.
That's in there. That's actually planned.
Yep.
For us
Yeah,
to
but
do
is
that.
it's not in the recommendation, I don't think. Is it possible just to make it really obvious that we will?
I think we can, yep.
Yes. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, and the most important point though is this. Nicola's concern, there's a lot of us in this space around the council table, the smaller bins in future, that people will have that option. Is that possible?
It is possible.
Put it in as a recommendation that we will look at that, just to give people that assurance that we are looking at that cost issue.
I think we can do that in the future. So I think what the advice we've had from other councils, as I understand it, and Chris can correct me, is that we're better off starting with a standardised service and then actually evaluating when we're 6 to 12 months into that, how we then create a non-standard specific service which would address the low user issue.
Yes, that would definitely be the preference, because you do create and introduce an enormous amount of operational risk trying to create a really bespoke service without practically understanding how the service would need to work. So the strong recommendation would be to start with a standard service and then assess that based on the actual results and interviews with residents, and then from there bring back something that was fully thought through for councillors to determine the next steps and the appropriate bin sizing.
Okay, I'll talk to you about that offline again. The organics processing, for me, this seems to be the risk area. So if we don't get money from MFE, does that mean then we'll have to fund it ourselves, or would we be looking at private money, just given there's no point in collecting it all if we can't do anything with it?
Not necessarily. I mean, if MFE funding did decrease and councils did drop out, then we would have to consider alternative solutions. Smaller scale, but as I said, we will know more once the other councils confirm their position and we're clear on MFE. But it's a pretty innovative market out there, so I'm sure we can find a solution.
Okay, and just last quick question. Sorry if I missed it. I think the government policy is still to require curbside organics, isn't it?
There was just actually today, there is the Waste Mins Conference, which is the National Conference of Waste Peeps. And the Minister actually addressed that conference today at 1:30 p.m. And so we've had hot off the press updates from our staff who were there. And her statement was that they are still considering their food waste collection policy and the container return scheme policy. But that we should expect policies on both of those issues in the near future. So that suggests to us that they are certainly still looking at food waste and food waste collection as something that they would like to see us going forward, but we can't say that for certain until we know what the policy announcement is. The Minister did also say that if they decide to go forward with requiring food waste collections, that they might consider moving that 2030 deadline out a few years, but again, we don't know what that might look like. Certainly the government have not said that they're not doing it, so at the moment all we have is that they are continuing to work in this space, and that we should expect policy announcements in this space in future around food waste collection. Minister
Thank you.
Simmons?
Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, there were just quite a few people who had suggested that one of the things they liked about the current system was the user pays nature of it. And I was just wondering, if there was an investigation into a user pays system with, say, like bin tags or something like that?
Sure. So we did look at but there are a few options around that in terms of bin tags. So in Auckland Council used to do bin tags where you put a tag on the bin to say I've paid for this bin to be picked up, but they found that it was just operationally so difficult that they stopped doing it. I don't know all the details, but you can imagine bin tags falling off when somebody's put it on, and it's those sorts of things. They had real problems with it. The other technology that is available is putting an RFID tag on the bin, and every time the truck picks it up, it scans the bin. But again, the technology is unreliable. So what they found is that they often get lots of errors of it says that we didn't scan the bin and we did, or it says that we didn't scan, and so there was lots of issues with resolving complaints of people who had been charged incorrectly. And so the advice we've had is that both of those systems are operationally not practical. The other thing that I would just say to that concern about kind of user pays being a key issue in waste reduction is that that doesn't really line up with what we're actually seeing in the market at the moment, where what we're seeing is 66% of Wellingtonians are more than happy to pay quite a bit of money for a private bin service and 240 litres worth of bin disposal capacity a week. So to me, that suggests that possibly price is not a key motivator in this space for waste reduction. And we think that actually the key lever we have for waste reduction is what Chris's slide was talking about earlier, which is reducing rubbish disposal capacity. And so by providing people with less rubbish disposal capacity, they're more likely to then use the organics bin we've provided them, the recycling bin that we've provided them. So that's our advice, is that we actually think restricting rubbish disposal capacity is a more important lever than user pays in this space. And just also to say that in terms of when we're looking at restricting the rubbish disposal capacity, we're actually providing more than double more capacity in the organics bin and the recycling bin. So people are getting more capacity overall, but we're restricting the rubbish and giving them more capacity in those other spaces that we really want them to use.
Thank you.
Councillor McNulty?
Yeah, just interested around the commercial legality, because we're essentially putting some private companies out of business, I would have thought, or, you know, if we use traffic management, for instance, the advice has been if we were to set up traffic management services, we have to tender to the open market. So how is it different?
Can I answer on the traffic management, because that's literally around the procurement rules that we're required to follow under Waka Kotahi, because they're a funder, we're required to follow their procurement guidelines. So they require us to outsource all activities for road maintenance, and where we don't, we have to create a CCTO, a trading organisation, which then we have to behave as if it's an independent contractor.
So to answer the question, I'm not going to answer your question because I think it's a legal question and we should get Beth to answer it. So if you wanted to ask it again on Thursday, or we could get Beth to respond to you.
Yep. What
I can say is that Beth has sought external legal advice on this exact issue from someone who's an expert in the competition law space. And that so far we've been given no reason to be concerned about moving forward in that direction. Certainly lots of other councils have done this recently, and we haven't seen any issues around competition law with councils that have made this change. That said, of course, Beth wants to dot her I's and cross her T's, so that's why she sought external legal advice, because there also I understand has been some change recently in competition law, so she just wanted to make sure. So that is an issue she's aware of.
Cool. So I guess that CCTO scenario, do we know if that is driven, and again, it's probably Beth, but is that driven by anything in terms of competition law, or do you think that's driven more by Waka Kotahi's very...
It's Waka Kotahi, it's actually the Land Transport Act.
Okay,
Yep.
Land Transport Act, cool.
Deputy Mayor Fone.
Thanks. I'd love it if we could have our own traffic management CCTO, but anyway, that's not the subject we're on. I'm going to do that when I leave council. So questions from me. I just want to understand more about the green waste collection difference with the garden waste as opposed to just food collection. So that's what you're proposing in the bigger bin. What are the benefits or positives and negatives on each of those options?
The benefit of collecting the food and garden waste is that we divert significantly more organic material from the landfill. So what we would collect in a food waste system is about half as much as we expect we would collect in a food and garden system in terms of tonnes of organic material diverted. We know from the waste analysis surveys that we have that when you look into somebody's 120 litre private rubbish bin or their 240 litre private rubbish bin, there's a lot of green waste in there. So that's kind of one of those things that's hidden. I think if you see people putting their council bag out, you don't really see green waste in council bags, but people who are using their private bin service, a lot of green waste goes into those bins, and you just don't see it because you can't see what's inside the bin. So that's really the gain that we would see in that space, is that garden waste that's currently going into people's rubbish bins would hopefully instead go into the organics bin, and therefore would end up being processed into compost or something else beneficial, rather than going into the landfill and creating emissions and odour.
Okay, great, thank you. I've got, you're okay for 3? Yes. Yep. Yeah, great, thank you. Just in terms of switching over procurement, how will we do that in terms of, obviously there's a lot of, as we were just saying, a lot of private people on the out there at the moment. When we switch over, how will we go through that process? And I guess what I'm asking is, are our contractors paid living wage at the moment, and what are the benefits of us being the procurer?
yes, they are paid living wage. If it was a decision to proceed, then we'd undergo a normal procurement process.
And I guess one of the benefits of us being the procurer of the whole rubbish service system is obviously that then we're extending that living wage. We can be confident that all rubbish collections in the city are living wage, but also, under the procurement process, we can look at those other outcomes. I can't remember the exact term in the procurement strategy, but there's a number of other things that we can look at in procurement in terms of, Māori employment or using Māori businesses, living wage. There's lots of those other things that can be considered as part of the procurement process that I'm guessing that other private companies would be less concerned about.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. And final question, quite a few of the submissions obviously liked the system that we've got now and didn't see anything wrong with it, and but particularly the life cycle stage of the 140 litre bins that we've got at the moment. And so the idea of replacing that sustainably didn't fit well. So is there a way we could continue the use of our 140 bins, or what would the use of those, what would happen to those if we changed out?
Yeah, so we can certainly investigate that as part of the implementation process. So certainly we know that there are possibilities for recycling these bins, that's something that can happen in New Zealand that we would need to look into. Also, Auckland Council, when they made some service changes, they were actually able to reuse 120,000 bins that were still in good condition, that they were able to essentially, I guess, put a different coloured top on or something like that and then put them back out into service. Now, I can't say whether that would be possible for us in this implementation, but I can say that we'll investigate options for reuse and recycling of those bins that need to come out of commission. I mean, the other thing is that while many of the bins are in perfectly good order right now, they are getting old as a fleet. They have been out in service for almost 15 years. So we would expect to start seeing some increase in damage as they get older. So it's not like we're replacing brand new bins. If we were replacing them, we are replacing bins that have been out in service for probably more than what they would tell us their expected life is. So we've technically already sweated those assets a bit.
Councillor Free? Thank you. Gosh, it's been quite helpful. You've certainly been a fount of knowledge. So where would the centralised, has there been any thought about where the centralised food or green waste facility might be located?
The procurement process has been open to any location, essentially. So the procurement process so far, we've tried to be really open. We're open to any technology, we're open to any location, we're open to any ownership models. We want to be allow the market to bring us innovations, and we didn't want to close up our options too quickly. There are benefits and disbenefits in terms of having a facility close to us or further away from us. One of the issues with these types of facilities is that they do smell. And even if you do everything engineeringly possible to make it gold standard, it's still going to smell a bit. So you don't really want them in places where there's residential areas if you can help it. The other thing that is actually there's a benefit to having them in more rural communities is that actually the end product from these, whether it's digestate or compost or whatever, is actually primarily used in farming, right? They're the big customer. So if you have a facility, for example, that was in Horowhenua or Manawatu, it might seem like, gosh, that's a long way from us, that's inefficient, but actually it's just that it's really close to the customer. So when thinking about that, you just need to think about the whole life cycle of the product. But that is something that we're open to, and the procurement process has been really clear that it's open to within region and out of region options, and that we would just look at what the overall best outcome is. And it won't just be looking at what's the cheapest, but it will also look at like the emissions. So it would look at the emissions of transporting something further, and those sorts of considerations as well when considering what the preferred supplier would be.
Thank you. And the other, another question, what's our compliance rate for our current recycling in terms of how well people are sorting it, and how will we actually make sure people know what to do? Because this is going to rely a lot on voluntary compliance.
Yeah, so the compliance rate is essentially the contamination rate, as you're referring
Yep,
to. It's
that's
about,
what I meant.
It's about 16, 17, 18%. It tends to vary, and it's worse in some areas than others, which is why we've got an education campaign that we run amongst schools and online just to help educate people. So if you were to proceed with something like this, you would need a big education campaign. You want to focus on the children, focus on the parents as well, because it would be a big step change. But it'd essentially be the same thing that people went through 15 years ago when they introduced recycling, and now it's common. And for most people, it's very common to use a recycler. You know which vessel goes where, and would have to just make sure that we wrap enough education around any change.
And there is funding in there for exactly that kind of work, and other things like we know, for example, there's really good evidence that just putting a sticker on the bin that shows what goes in it and what doesn't go in it is a really big tool. So we can look at things like that. We also have a staff member who's just been doing a whole piece of work talking to all the other councils who have made these changes and brought in new organic services, what worked, what didn't work, what was effective. So she's been pulling together a report for us that will give us some really good guidance if we go ahead with this change about how do we best support people to make the most out of the new service.
And for the avoidance of doubt, we've included project management costs in our one.
And I've got one really quick one. Can you just give us the definition of the CBD and a definition of what's a multi-unit dwelling, being that they'll be excluded?
The CBD.
No, but where is the boundaries of it?
We could send you a map because the CBD service has a particular line. It doesn't necessarily map to exactly what we consider the CBD in the district plan, for example. So the best thing would be for us to provide you a map that shows you where the CBD is. Multi-unit developments or multi-unit dwellings is generally 10 units or more on a single plot of land, whether they're townhouses or terraced housing or whatever. So those that are outside of the CBD would be excluded, and then, as we said, houses that are on a private road, and so therefore, if they put the bin out on the curb, actually it's still on their own private land, and we can't legally put a truck up there to pick it up.
We do have a hard end at 3:30 for this session, and so if you have questions that don't get answered, you will need to go back to writing or talking to people offline. So if we go to one from you, Councillor Chung.
Okay, I'll pick the best one. Looking at, we have, say, two private contractors at the moment. So are we going to time this so that it fits in with when their contracts actually expire? Because they're going to have lots and lots of trucks and lots of bins and things. And so are they going to be very happy that they can't do anything with them, or are they going to be in line for providing the service?
Yes, so we will align it with our procurement process, because this is not an easy process. We're not acquiring IT systems here. What we need to understand is what is the service that council want us to offer. Then we need to go to market. Then we need to provide a sufficient time for them to in most cases, build the trucks. And the service that we're talking about being Wellington is not one type of truck is going to, one truck is not going to serve all of our needs. So we actually have quite a specialist fleet to get up our long, skinny streets. So it is all, if you look on the last page on the timeline here, this is actually quite a tight time frame. So by the time you award the contract, you need to give them at least 18 months to actually make sure that you get the fleet in. Then you need to do your operational implementation plan, your behavioural change. So even though it's 27, 28, and it seems like a long time away, when you need to get your fleet ready, you need to build or ensure that you've got your processing plant ready to go, is actually, it's a pretty significant project. Does that answer your question?
Yep, great. That's great, thanks.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yep. Last question is on money. So I just want to get reminded of the amount. So my understanding was we had 20 million, which was ring fenced in the from profit from the Southern Landfill. And so what is the extra debt that is being put on for this program to work?
Okay. We got a bit caught out last time because it turns out the landfill surplus fund is just a paper asset on the balance sheet. So for us to spend it, we still have to borrow money. So if we're spending the landfill surplus fund, we are still increasing the amount of debt that council holds. So just in terms of you thinking about the debt headroom. But a significant amount of this is being funded out of the landfill surplus fund. The organics bins, all of the new organics bins, we are optimistic will be funded entirely by the MFE grant. All of the other new bins can be funded entirely from the landfill surplus fund. And then there's still some money in the landfill surplus fund left to contribute towards the organics processing facility, but I can't remember the exact number for you, but it's several $1 million to contribute towards the organics processing facility. And then there is some brand new debt to top that up for the organics processing facility.
Councillor Chung, one very quick one.
Oh, great, thanks. The pricing of the private green waste bins, at the moment, they're priced differently from rubbish bins, aren't they? So is that actually more expensive or cheaper?
It's generally cheaper to dispose of green waste than landfill. So the landfill disposal costs are quite high. They're generally $230 per tonne, whereas the processing costs for just garden waste on their own are more down around like $100 a tonne, give or take. So it's the same cost. The collection costs cost just as much to pick the bin up and empty it, but the disposal cost for garden waste is lower. So that wouldn't surprise me that they're charging less to the customers.
I see. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you.
That question was so quick, Ray. You get another one.
Okay, I happen to have another one. Does this collection service, does that include small shops like, small retail shops? Can they actually participate in this, or do they have to still go to a commercial operator?
They would still need to go to a commercial operator, so this essentially excludes all commercial participation, commercial properties. That said, we do know that at least in the CBD, we do know that quite a few commercial properties will buy a rubbish bag and stick their rubbish out for that collection, which might continue. We do also allow some community facilities, if they apply to us, like a sports club or something, if they apply and say, can we have a bin, that at the moment we will often provide them with a recycling bin. So that we would be looking at whether we can continue that under the new service as well, to what extent we can do that.
Yep, great.
Deputy Mayor Foon, do you have a teeny little one? Question?
Spicer landfill smells. This is going to take both councils to mitigate that. Yeah, so just what does the picture look like going forward, and how can you keep us involved or updated?
Yeah. I guess the key thing there is that if we don't do anything, Porirua City Council will likely not do anything either. We are the largest sort of, if you want to call it, supplier of organic material to an organics processing plant. Without the volumes that we would provide, an organics processing plant would be very difficult for the other councils in the region to fund or justify on their own. Not impossible, but it becomes a lot more difficult. So that's a pretty key thing, that we really have to be the leader in the space if we want to see Porirua City Council continue on that journey. We are working closely with Porirua City Council and Hutt City Council on the procurement, and that includes, closely working with them on what their plans are for collection changes and those sorts of things. And we will keep you updated on that process as it continues, and if anything changes in terms of our council friends participating with us, we will update you as well.
Ngā mihi team, that was an incredibly informative session. Thank you very much. And thanks to all councillors. Cheers.